Hello and welcome to Process of the Month this month with me, Rory Canavan. Today we're going to be looking at the software change management process. So as ever, we'll run through the agenda, and first and foremost we'll be looking to capture the primary and secondary objectives of the process, what every good process should actually seek to do to stop it experiencing process sprawl and trying to take care of the world. We'll also have a process run through as well, so we'll be using good old Aris to take us through the steps that are actually required in that process. We'll look at some potential banana skins that are associated with the software change management process, and we'll doff our caps to our sponsors with much love. And finally, we'll wrap up with the process that is going to come up for the following month. So first and foremost then, the primary objective of the software change management process is to ensure that the software change management follows a recognized procedure. It sounds a bit of a catch-all, but these are the points where you actually sit down and ask yourself, what do we actually want to achieve within this process? So license compliance or adherence as a minimum should be there, potentially having a rollback plan and potentially having a change management plan or a repair plan within that change management process might also be required, as we actually have modeled here. Secondary objectives, that due diligence is carried out to assess the business impact of any software change prior to a decision being taken on whether the rollout takes place. So we actually make a decision to say, yes, this is good, or no, this is bad. Now, one thing about this process too, and the way that it's modeled, is that you may not feel that it's necessarily appropriate for a desktop installation, and so the appropriate level of management oversight is dependent on the risk in actually going forward with the software. Whereas perhaps installing an ERP system, it's entirely appropriate to put it through several levels of management checks and balances. Finally, one of our other secondary objective is that we want to make sure that the scope is verified for completion and accuracy both before and after the deployment stroke change takes place. Very important again, because if you've got lots of little bits of software going out here, there and everywhere, you want to make sure that they're actually going to the right devices. So again, we can start to determine how important these processes actually are to an organization based on the fact that this process can be called by 5 other processes here. So as they've been modeled in the SAM Charter process kit, the BYOD process might be an instigator of a change management process, because we're actually setting up a service for an individual to plug into with their own device. We've got the software test management process, or software test process here, excuse me, because if software has come through via a request and it's not on the supported software catalog, we want to make sure it's been through a test process before we actually go ahead and install it, or test approvals, whatever you may want to call it. There could be a scope verification exercise or process that's actually been run here. So it could be that some software has fallen out of its hardware scope and so needs correcting and needs changing in some way. And we've got our typical software request process here as well. For those default titles that are on your supported software catalog, they've been through that check. They've had that stamp of approval from IT already, so we can actually go ahead and step forward with the software change management process. And finally too, we have the hardware disposal process. So to make sure that we are following best practice and that we are actually cleansing our hardware devices prior to disposal, we make sure that actually we are wiping those machines clean, or indeed if the machines are leased, then they are being returned back to their original state, which could be a term and condition of the contract from the leased company. As ever, what we shouldn't be doing is just assuming that a request that comes in is, yes, it's fine, it's Tom in project management, there's no problems there, we just take it and we run with it. So as ever, we should be actually making some sort of a validation check. So first and foremost, that the software is actually approved and there's some evidence of a test certificate through the test process, and that we validate the software change request itself. Again, the SAM manager could be the instigator of this, or you could have somebody actually dedicated to get filtering change requests in that regard. Possibly service management would be well placed to do that. We've got one of three options that can come out of that validation check. It could be that the software has not been tested. Somebody's trying to sneak a title under the radar. So off we go to the software test process. If there's no license or contract to justify the change, then we pass back to the software request process, actually rejecting it in the first place. If you haven't bought it, we're not installing it. And then we've got the final option here, software change meets all validation checks. And so we can proceed with the next step of the change management process. Now, as you can see, it gets quite busy quite quickly here, because after the initial assessment of the change request, we take the time to then make the technical and business assessment of the software change as well. And again, this is very subjective, but it's going to be one of those scenarios. If it's just a random install of a PDF reader, you're not going to go through this level of overhead and management. In fact, it's probably just going to be on a network share there, where you just click on it and let the user install it, or it's part of their possibly even some sort of software portal that you let users actually have access to. But if it is that e-business suite or that enterprise wide installation or change, you are absolutely going to go through this level of due diligence. So off the back of that technical business assessment of software change, we're going to have several outputs resulting from that. A stakeholder list, so who's the software actually influencing, some sort of a change schedule, i.e. how are we sort of phasing this in through the company, a rollback plan. So if things do go badly, what can we actually do to repair the situation? A validation of the device scope as well. And finally, a software change verdict as well. So are we actually saying that this is good for the company? Now, if for any reason after that hurdle, the software change is to be rejected, then we've got a step here to inform the requestee of why the software change is being rejected, and we pass that back through the software request process then at that point. And again, it's handy to have reasons for rejection there. A flat-out refusal will just get people's backs up, so do be keen to let people know why. So if the technical and business assessment has succeeded for the software change, then we're going to go through a communications exercise. Now, I've starred here the help desk as a possible means of communication. It could be too that you have a communications department, or you work through HR. Again, whoever's best placed to help promote that message through the organisation to those influenced by the software change is best placed to help out there. So next we get down to the actual step of deploying the software. So again, we go back to our Trusty Apps packaging team here. They have their stakeholder list, they have their device scope, and they have their change schedule. So that influences how quickly they do it and when they do it, and which software is actually being deployed. And then we have our deployment system here as well. And it could be there are those odd rogue elements or titles that aren't necessarily deployed by a system. They could actually be installed by hand. And if that's the case, then that's something that you'll need to model here too. As ever, we need to make sure that we go through a QA checking process to make sure that we've delivered to the devices and to the schedule and the software itself. So we've got our stakeholder list, our change schedule here, our device scope, and our inventory report at this time. Now, what we mean by a delta report here is the D is for the differences. So it's the difference between what's been deployed and actually the device scope then at that point. So Let's take the bottom row here first because we can, it'll be easiest on the page. We can communicate software change success if the device scope is met. If we do have an option to return leased equipment, then we can feed back into the hardware disposal process and that activity can take place. And it might be too that you need to go through some degree of end user acceptance trials as well. And if that's the case, then you can hand out to that process to make sure that everybody's happy with the change that's been made. If, however, the device scope has not been met, then we've got to do some research and analysis to find out why. And depending on the severity of the failure, we've got one of two options that we've got modeled here. It could be that we decide to roll back, or it could be that we decide to actually change or repair whatever it is that has broken in the first place. Now, all the processes to date have been modeled on a linear fashion, so you look at them as if you're going left to right and the pages run sequentially. I want you to imagine now that actually from page D, it's like the letter Y on its side. So page E is going to be the upper prong of that, and F is going to be the lower prong. So what we have here is page E. Now, we've decided that we're actually going to instigate a rollback plan. Things have just been a complete disaster, so we're not going to make any attempt at repairing. Because we've already had our rollback plan, which was something that we went through with the technical and business assessment earlier on, we know what it is we're actually going to do and how we're going to do that. We want to make sure that the rollback was successful. Now, if it was successful, we can communicate the BAU state to stakeholders what our next steps are going to be. Will there be a further rollout of software in the future? Are we just going to, have we reached a decision that we're just going to stay where we are for the time being? If, however, the rollback was not successful, then we've got this kind of while do loop, if you know, to doff our caps to the programmers of this world, just to make sure that we actually mop up everything that we said we were going to uninstall or roll back to. The lower prong of the process, and this is going to be instigating a change repair plan. You might get a sense of deja vu because essentially the steps are very similar in that respect, but rather than rolling back, we are actually going through a repair. We have our Delta report here, we have our inventory report, so we know that some of the installations didn't go properly, or some of the changes, I should say, didn't go according to plan. That's fine, and we go through the same step again, but rather than a rollback review, we're looking to have a change repair plan review here. And again, if it's a success, then we can communicate that success to our stakeholders. If, however, it's not, then we've got a sort of a roll around here to make sure that we get it right until we're happy. Some potential banana skins then with the software change management process. The management overhead should be proportional to the business impact. And again, I think this goes back to the point I was trying to make previously. You may not go through this for an installation of a desktop title, but you would absolutely do it for a rollout of an ERP system. Try and make sure that you don't get stuck in an endless while do loop when either repairing or rolling back software as well. There has to be a point at which you cut your losses and perhaps take a break from the norm of thinking, right, well, we're using our deployment system to crawl back these changes. Maybe you get to the point where you actually have to send somebody out with a DVD or the rights and privileges to make the change locally. As ever, much love to our sponsors. I'd like to thank Aspera, Flexera and Snow for their time in taking an ad in the process kit. Thank you very much, chaps. And the same goes to softwaremanagement.org, to ITAM Intelligence and Medora Consulting also. Again, a big thank you to John Grubb at Software Advocates, and to Paul Bergam and Louise Ulrich at Licensing School, and to Craig Garenti and his chaps at Palisade Compliance. And also bringing up the rear there is Chris Goff and his chaps at Derived Logic. If you like what you've seen, please go to the link below where you have the opportunity to buy a copy of your own process kit. It comes with 21 other processes aside from the software change management process, and in my own humble opinion, it is a necessary component for any successful ITAM implementation. So next month, we're going to be looking at the asset use verification process. And as ever, if you've got any questions around what you've seen, please feel free to email me at rory.canavan@samcharter.com. I'm occasionally on Twitter at StoryByRory, and I'm a heavy user of LinkedIn, so please feel free to add me. You can just search for me on Rory Canavan, or you can just click on the link there direct and invite away. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you next month.